Night
DJ
Watchman.
LeRoy.
I'm here, buddy. And,
Yeah.
and Night
And
Watchman, I can feel it. Don't we have a debate about to happen in a week?
well, first of all, let's celebrate Labor Day.
Oh, yes, indeed.
That's
So what
right.
are you doing? Are you doing some grilling or what?
Absolutely.
Okay, okay. So that sounds very good, man.
Hmm.
What are you going to be putting on the barbie, as they say?
Probably some salmon, I think.
Yeah, no sausages, man. What's up?
You know, at a certain age and stage, I feel like I start to phase out some of those things. So,
Oh
I'll
man.
enjoy a sausage if somebody else puts it on, but I'm not gonna come and I'm not gonna overdo it on that.
Well, Night Watchman. We always love creatives, right? We
Hmm.
love some authors to talk about, well, the passion, the passion that's like exudes out, and they have to tell that story.
That's right.
So one of them actually, funny enough, is a veteran of Soul Lounge Primetime, and that could only be Ruth Rathblott. Yes, Ruth.
Hello.
How are you, my dear?
It is so good to be back. I'm great. I'm great.
See, Night Watchman, what did we say? We said that because of we liked her so much that we would invite her back to the cookout. Is that correct?
Right, and we're literally airing this show on the day of the cookout.
So look at that.
You cannot make the stuff up. You cannot at all. And you know what? Another one. This is her first time on Soul Line Prime, and that could only be Nana Eku Brew-Hammond. Did I do correct? Did-
Almost.
and you know why? It's because Night Watchman always gets me like flustered, and I don't know why.
Yes, yes. I'll take the blame for your whatever.
Well, ladies, we're about to get this thing popping. So let me start off though with you, Ruth, and please, you're gonna have to tell me the story, the journey, and also about the first novel that you had about your journey.
Sure. I started out writing a book I did a TEDx first. That's how this whole thing started. I did a TEDx on the idea of my journey of hiding my limb difference, my disability. I was born missing my left hand.
Mm.
And then I talked about how I'm hid. And that was just kind of a simple journey. And as people started asking me about that TEDx that they witnessed and saw, I realized I had more to say and how to expand all the stories that went behind those 25 years of hiding. Because kid, when I started a new high school, like many of us, Curtis and Night Watchman, most of us, when we start something new, we want to fit in, right? We want to be like other people. We want friends. And that's no different when you're starting high school. I think it probably gets even more magnified. And so I started out hiding, and I realized I needed to tell some of those stories of why, some of the stories I told myself about hiding, and then some of the things I encountered. And also then how I learned to unhide by meeting somebody, by finding community of shared experiences, by starting to share out my story. And so single-handedly, my first book was really a memoir and a self-help book about the idea of here's my story if it's helpful to you in any way. And what I realized in telling that story is that there were a lot of people hiding, and that people hide things all the time, whether they hide their family backgrounds, their education, their religion, their ethnicity, their stutter, their accents. People hide things all the time, their relationship status.
Yes, true.
And what I found is it's exhausting and it's lonely. And it takes a toll on our mental and our physical health. And as I was collecting these stories, Curtis, I realized there was another book because my thinking had expanded on more of the universality of what this hiding thing was. That again, most of us are hiding something, and often we think we're the only ones. And so,
Ruth, then I have to jump in and just ask you this question, knowing about the hiding, knowing also, and I know the listening audience doesn't also know that you are an educator and a social worker, right?
Yes.
And so in your work, let's say I'm throwing out the Harlem Educational Activities Fund. Were you able to, from your vantage point, observe some of the young people that you were interacting with and seeing that maybe, you know what, maybe they have a story, maybe they also have a trauma that they're trying to work through.
Oh, absolutely. And I remember going to Nepal with some of the young people that we worked with, and there were some, there were some stares and people looking at this group of kids that was over there, and the students were somewhat upset with that reaction.
Mm-hmm.
And at one point, I talked about my own journey of people staring and looking too long or saying things off comment. And what I've realized, again, to your exact question, Curtis, is most of us are hiding. And I had at one point this bias that maybe students weren't hiding anything because they post it all on social media. They go on Snapchat and Instagram, et cetera. And the truth is, that's a lot of times a facade of things that are happening in their life, and not necessarily the things that they don't want to share with other people, especially when I think about the young people going off to college for the first time and encountering people that are different than them, that may have had a different family background, a different income background, a different religious background. Like, there's just all this difference. And so how do you share parts of yourself, your different experiences and your different perspectives? And how do we allow for those to be valued? And so that's the space that I definitely saw. And part of it, Curtis, is I hadn't before, up until that point, I hadn't shared my own journey of disability and difference with others. So how could I expect them to share it with me if I wasn't willing to share it myself?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So Nana Ekua, your, am I calling a nonfiction or am I saying a novel? Do tell. My parents' marriage, you must tell.
It is a novel, and my mother has instructed me to inform everybody that this is not about her or my dad and their marriage.
Inquiring minds definitely wanted to know, because especially, I was at school, at Columbia, and one of the things I was looking at, of course, sub-Saharan Africa, and I just remember Flight Lieutenant Jerry Rollins, so, Ghana, so do tell.
Yes. So it's so interesting, Ruth, that you were speaking about hiding, right? Because this book it's about a young woman whose father was hiding in a way. She grew up with him till she was 12 years old, and an inciting incident happens, and she discovers that he has 3 other wives and multiple other children living on another side of town. So the book is about Ghanaian marriage customs and in post-colonial Ghana, and the emotional toll and the legal confusion that it causes for this woman. And it's also interesting, Curtis, that you mentioned Flight Lieutenant Jerry Rawlings, because so just to catch you up, a little backgrounder is in Ghana, there are 3 types of marriage. There's customary marriage and Mohammedan marriage, which allow for polygyny, a man having multiple wives. And then there's ordinance marriage, which was instituted during colonialism, which is strictly monogamous. Gotcha. And so what's happening is that men, usually rich men, would exploit the sort of 3 kind of legal types of marriage, and would have multiple customary wives and then an ordinance wife, even though it's illegal to do both systems together. And it would just cause a lot of emotional confusion, but also a legal quagmire, because when the person dies, who gets what, who gets the estate, who's the true next of kin. But alongside that, there are many different groupings of people, or tribes, as some people call them. And the matrilineal tribes do not, if a husband dies or the father dies, the children don't inherit. It's the sister and their children who inherit. So what was happening for a really long time is, if a rich man in the Akan tribe, the Ashanti tribe, would die, his sister would come knocking at the door and be like, "Give me the keys, y'all need to get out." And so the wife of Flight Lieutenant Jerry John Rawlings, who's also an Akan, in 1983 really pushed for a law that was instituted, that if a man explicitly said in his will that he wanted to give his things to his children, then that overrode or superseded the tradition. So just a little background there on it.
I guess there was a little bit of pushback.
Well, something, I think that's a big issue in the culture. We haven't resolved. There's like so many different kind of streams of culture and tradition going on. We have like traditional Ghanaian culture, then we have modern, modernity, then we have British colonial culture, and we haven't really resolved the clash of that. So in some ways, these things are still happening. But I think also too, what's also kind of has morphed into is, you'll still have a rich man with like multiple girlfriends, but it's now infidelity versus, having multiple customary wives.
Gotcha. Well, yeah, Ruth, I mean, when we often see that, and especially when I was studying there at university, seeing how the cultural dynamics really always kind of clash, so certainly you working with the population of young people that you were working with, what were you observing, with these young people? Now, I know it says Harlem Educational Activities Fund, but I do know it extended way beyond Harlem.
Right. And I don't work there anymore. I know that. We expanded the program to Brooklyn and to Queens, Jackson Heights in Queens, and Bed-Stuy in Brooklyn. And I think what I hear you saying, Ekua, is the idea of those pieces of culture that's the piece about hiding that is nuanced, right? Because I think the goal is that people can be their best self, they can show all of the pieces where they're different and their different experiences. And yet in some cultures, it's actually not acceptable, right? So how do we create, and given what you talked about, and I'm so glad you put the thread together of the father hiding parts of themselves, and even in the culture, this being kind of an accepted practice, right? Of in quote unquote infidelity, or how it was seen before. And this idea of hiding, because I imagine, even though we may make assumptions that father was, having a great time, that pressure of keeping that hidden, and all the forecasting, and even the people who knew keeping it hidden, and that it's exhausting and it's lonely when you're doing that.
Yes, indeed. I mean, certainly, Nana Ekua, is that hiding, that particular part, coming to the States, we certainly do know that there was one state that was allowed to enter the Union if they would denounce and not practice a polygamy. That, of course, being Utah with the Mormon population. So let's say you now coming from a culture that also has accepted it, immediately coming to the States, did you say, no, we have to embrace the a single union and no more polygamy? Tell me, what was their mindset entering the States?
Well, I think so. Here's the thing. I think in Ghana, it's not as if so, like I said, these streams are sort of all happening together at the same time. So there are people who have, multiple wives, but in it, as like sort of the world is just becoming more modern. It's, by 1957, when Ghana obtained independence, it wasn't, and even now, it's not like, it's not as common or as out in the open as it might have been in traditional society. And so I think that, there is an understanding, there is this feeling that, there is the one wife, that for most, I would say for most Ghanaians in the cities, in the urban areas, there is this idea that, the family unit is one wife, even though there is an extended family of, cousins and all of that stuff that's still very close in the culture. So I think that for this at the heart of the book, the young woman is like really traumatized by her experience with her dad, just having multiple wives, her mother and her stepmother jockeying for the father's heart, and just all the upheaval it caused in their family. So when she deliberately chooses to marry a man who is like sort of nothing like her father. He does not have money. He,
Mhm.
you know, a different kind of man. But
Yeah.
when they come to the States, it's not so much, she's seeking to have a completely different experience. She wants to have a marriage that is fidelity, you know, based.
Mhm.
And so I don't think it's that she is, you know, seeing it as a big difference. She's seeing it as what she desires.
Yes, yeah. One things certainly I got to say with Ruth, you know, talking about the anxiety of juggling these particular things, trying to keep this particular this secret and hidden. You
Yeah.
know, I you know that causes a lot of angst and I should say probably maladies of really physical ailments.
It definitely it takes a toll on our mental health. It takes a
Mm,
toll on our physical health, and it keeps us feeling disconnected. Like we can't really be our true self because we're always worried about someone finding out. So
yeah.
yeah, absolutely takes a toll, and it's exhausting. And again, it's, as I said, it's lonely. And what I'll say, Curtis, and I imagine Nanequa in your work too, is in thinking about this family, is the idea that it's, what's the best way to say this, that it feels like they they have to find their, they have to create stories, right? They're
Mm,
constantly forecasting how they're thinking about this. And or part of it is that at some point you almost take it as that's your story versus examining it and doing the self-awareness work of why am I making these choices in my life? How am I thinking about my connection to others? So I think, yeah, and I'm so curious about your writing process too, and how, what this piece was to you.
Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely. I
yeah.
just wanted to quickly say, I love that you mentioned the pressure that it puts a person under when they are, you know, hiding something, because the man who is, you know, her father, at the heart of the of her sort of conundrum, her emotional conundrum, he is under a lot of pressure. He is, you know, he's a self-made man. He's quite wealthy, and part of the features of the culture is, you know, this is the status symbol, right? Like you have the money, you are able to have multiple wives, you are able to, you know, provide for multiple children. And his and sort of, you know, raison d'etre or reason for doing all
Mm,
of this is because he wants to be this big man, because he was born to a mother who had him young and under sort of, you know, scandalous circumstances, if you will. And so he really wanted to make something of himself so that he could be seen in the society as someone powerful and big. And his real desire was to leave, you know, a powerful and wealthy legacy for his own children. And in the end, his choices bring that in, you know, threaten that ultimately, without giving the book away. So yeah, I think that that is a really great sensitivity that you brought up, because I think it's easy for us to sort of villainize or vilify people like for the choices they make without really thinking about what is driving those choices.
mm,
So yeah.
And something you just said too, I literally took a note, Nanequa, is this idea of sometimes we hide to be seen. And it sounds
mm.
strange. And I actually wish I had talked to you before this last book just came out, but I definitely want to do a LinkedIn post about it, because I think you're right. Even with that character you're describing, this idea of thinking that by putting a facade of yourself or a hidden part of yourself, like that part of yourself out there to prove something, to be seen, you're constantly then chasing that, right? Like you're constantly having to keep that up. That's the pressure too. Whereas if you were just your best self, or your, and I almost think sometimes the word authenticity is cliche, but if you were just able to be yourself and grow and build like we all try to do, you actually get seen in such a beautiful and different way, and are memorable.
Absolutely. I was just like, you know, snapping when you said that, hiding to be seen. That is so true. So true. Oh gosh. Yeah. You asked about my process. It was, you know, just the sort of writerly, I guess the boring part of just kind of doing the actual work. It took me a really long time to get to this place. We're talking about hiding. Hiding seems to be the theme, but it took me, I was working on a version of this book for close to a decade.
Wow.
I sold it, probably about 6 years into that process. And the last 3 years of going back and forth with the editor, and the last sort of meeting I had with two of the editors working on it, one of them asked me, what was the reason that you wanted to write this book? And when I sort of sat with that question and went back to the draft, I realized that there were these two troubled marriages that were sort of hiding in the folds of this draft that were driving the characters' actions. And I realized, like, okay, the story is actually not about what I was writing about, but it was about marriage. So once I sort of came to that, aha moment for myself, the writing became very uncomfortable because even though this book is not about my parents or their marriage, I had to wrestle with that. I had to wrestle with how did, my parents' marriage and marriages that I had seen growing up and my own formative relationships and the choices that I'd made, how had they, how had they come to be? And it was very uncomfortable. I wrote this book on the razor's edge, on the edge of my seat. But what I was taken away from it is I will always write this way, because I think when you can sort of strip away all of the sort of layers and really get down to that emotional razor blade, I think then you really are able to produce something that really, really cuts to the heart, for the reader and for yourself.
Yeah. Nana, and also Ruth, I'll ask you first, Nana. How do you define what is marriage? Tell me.
Ooh, you know what? I'm a newlywed. I am not even a year into this.
Congratulations.
Thank you so much. So I really don't know. I don't want to, pretend to know the answer to what that is. I think that it's a commitment to love and to show up. And that's it. And when I say commitment, that means when you're not in the mood, when it's, it's just a commitment to keep at it.
Beautiful, beautiful. Ruth, you're
going to ask me that? I don't know. So I've never been married. I've been in a I was in a long-term relationship, but I don't know what marriage. I mean, I guess that's not totally true, because I think that when I've seen friends' marriages, when I witnessed my own parents' marriage, I think I have ideas about marriage.
Yes.
And I also think that as someone who moved to New York reluctantly and resistantly, thinking I would only be here for 1 year, realizing that now after almost 30 years that New York, sometimes other priorities take over. So my career took over, my independence and freedom took over, my love of travel took over. And so, I think that marriage is, I ask people often when I hear, about Curtis, when I hear about long marriages and the Ekua, I ask people, what's the secret to a long marriage? And the consistent answer is compromise every time. Things through compromise.
And okay, Ruth, don't you know that we, New York, we in the center of the universe, how of all things, reluctantly coming to New York? Do tell.
Well, I grew up in Connecticut, and when I was growing up I'm not even going to mention the year, because why give it right now? But when I was growing up, New York was not so safe, and my parents took us in to go to the theater and to do things in New York, and then they kind of ushered us right back out. And so New York was not on my radar screen of a place where I wanted to kind of settle down, and yet it's where I've built now a career. It's where I built amazing friendships. It's where I see theater. Like, I am a theater addict. I go to a lot of theater on and off Broadway and see a lot of amazing things as a kind of a craving as an actress, like wanting to be an actress, but giving that up at 13, not because of my hiding my hand. Frustrated actress. I go to theater a lot. And I think that was probably part of the hardest part during COVID, is that people would say, oh, well, you can watch theater on TV. And I'm like, yeah, it's not the same. Like, theater, feeling the seats, how uncomfortable they are sometimes, seeing the actors spit, smelling the smells of theater, like that to me is theater. Like, it's so good.
Wow, wow. Nana Ekua, please. Now, did you have the same feeling about New York as Ruth, or had you
Well,
always?
I was actually I was born in upstate New York, but have from the age of 2 through most of my adult life, I have been a New Yorker. So I
Wow.
actually, because of marriage, have now moved my primary residence to Oakland, California. So
Get
I'm
out.
like,
Wow.
whoa. It's a different kind of feeling. So but yeah, I love New York. New York will always be, I agree, it's the best place. But Cali with the weather. Cali with the weather though. I gotta love the weather.
Nice, nice, and certainly. So I'll drop off this. So I not long ago, did my DNA ancestry, and I was thinking that it's going to be West Africa, like Senegal, Cote d'Ivoire, Cameroon, so forth. Turns out I'm 39% Nigeria,
Hey.
probably Igbo. Okay.
Hey.
So I'm definitely feeling. So I'm thinking about the colonial times of Africa, because at one point, Africa was just painted with a damn broad brush. Africa, what? There are separate cultures and countries and tribes. Who knew? So let's say you're growing up, as you said, upstate New York. What was some of the history that you remember being taught about that dark continent?
Well, so I grew up mostly in the city in Queens, New York, actually,
Oh,
and
which part?
I
Which part?
didn't really learn much about it. I mean, actually, I grew up in the 80s, and it was Reagan assimilationist time, so there was no. It was I was embarrassed. I was hiding. Like talk about like I would never reveal my middle name. I was furious with my parents for not giving me an English, an American first name. So
Like
it was really.
Tiffany or something, huh?
I wanted,
Tiff-
you know what? My mom, I wanted to be Bridget
I
Diane.
know.
Can
Got you,
you
got you.
imagine now? I cannot even imagine that. But I really struggled with that, and like got teased for being from Africa, Ghana. There was so much ignorance, and
Yes.
so I was not taught much about it, and to complicate things further, what was on the TV almost like 24/7 was that Sally Struthers commercial of feed the
Oh,
kids,
see.
Right.
save the children, and it was like kids in Ethiopia, with the flies, swirling around them, and that was Africa. That was Africa to Americans. So
Yes.
it was not easy.
That is so true. I mean, because I didn't know much either. And Ruth, for me, I remember being in grade school, middle school, and then I remember we were having the conflict in what was that, Ethiopia,
Mm.
and remember this particular with Biafrans. And so it's sort of this swollen belly, not knowing that's malnourishment. I'm thinking that, wow, these suckers are eating a lot of food here. Who knew? So I mean, so you tell me about your time there in Connecticut, and which part of Connecticut, by the way, because I've been traveling back and forth there with Karen, because her mom's is in Hamden.
Okay. I was in Fairfield County, so a little bit lower, close to the city. So it wasn't so far that New York felt like a different space. And it's funny that you bring up, I think two things that you both just said. When we talk about names, Ekua, I wanted to be called Diana also. Like one summer, because Ruth sounded so old. First of all, nobody in my class was ever named Ruth.
Yeah.
Everybody I met said, "Oh, my grandmother's name is Ruth." So I wanted out of that. One summer, my cousin, who apparently wanted the name Ruth, came to stay with us for a few weeks. And she said, "Let's switch names. Let's take a different name." And my father said, "Sure." She took Ruth and I took Diana.
Wow.
The first time he said to her, "Ruth," I took my name back right away. I said, "Yeah, I'm out. I want my name back. It's never changed since, even with all the grandmother comments about Ruth. I want it back."
You
And
accepted it. I love this. Okay, go ahead.
And then I think you're absolutely right. I think we had, and are still not totally taught about different cultures and different worlds, and Africa being one of them. And it wasn't until I actually went to Africa myself and understood pieces of it. And I think I'm still learning, right? There's still so much to your point, Curtis. It's one continent, but there's, to your point, there's so many cultures, so many tribes, so many different ways of being and different culture pieces to even culture within Africa. And so I was fortunate enough to take my first journey there and look forward to going back.
Where did you go?
I went to Zambia, Zimbabwe, Botswana, and South Africa. And
nice.
Loved it was, but I think what was so amazing, I should say, and was so amazing is just each place had such a different feel, and the foods and the smells and the spices, everything. I mean, it was just, and the animals, I have to say the animals.
It's funny because growing up, Ghana became Africa to me growing up, because that was sort of like all I was exposed to. And when I went to Zambia and South Africa and some other parts, I was just like blown away. I was like, oh, it's so different. So I think that it's so real that, unless you really sort of really look into the cultures and understand that it is not a monolith by any stretch of the imagination. Africa is 54 countries and so many more cultures inside of that. So
and that's the goal too, right? Is how do we take time to actually understand others, right? Because I think so much of the time we don't do the homework ahead of time, right? And I have been guilty of this myself for sure, is not doing the homework about other. And and as we got on this call, part of it is I wanted, like what we were talking about, is this idea of how do we expand the conversation around all aspects of diversity also, right? Like how do we think about it in larger lenses, and how do we think about the intersectionalities of those pieces when they come together as well? Like,
something that came to mind is I don't know that, we should be even thinking of it as homework, as so much more as empathy. Because when I was thinking about, being a kid and, the kids on TV with the swollen bellies and the flies swirling around them, it never occurred to me at that time to be empathetic. Like, I was just like, oh my gosh, this is impacting like my, my life and how I'm being seen. But it never occurred to me like, wow, these are children who are suffering. And we should, like, this is a problem, and we should feel sorry and figure out how, not even pity, but like, what are the actions we can take to support and help and move in. And I think that that's a big feature of just sort of human nature, right? That we lack a lot of like that fundamental empathy and love for each other. I think that if we were really approaching everybody with this feeling of, you're a human being and you are worthy of love and dignity, then we wouldn't be looking to paint somebody with a broad brush, because we would understand, just as we are complicated and we have layers to us and the intersectionalities that we're dealing with, so does the next person.
Yeah, absolutely.
No, and then I was going to say that. No, I wrote it down before you even said it. It's sort of humanity. Like, how do we allow for humanity and kindness, right? Like, because that's really the goal here. So that, and the word humanity has come up a lot in the work I talk about with hiding and unhiding. Like, how do we allow for humanity? Thank you for that, because that's a big piece of it.
Well, one of the things, of course, Ruth, that you point out there in your book is, embracing the differences. Okay, in this particular time, this period here in the States, especially when we see that impending election in November, is it possible for us to get past our differences and embrace one another, that common humanity?
That's the North Star, Curtis, the idea of allowing for difference and not and it's, the skill set that's required is absolutely, like Ekua said, the idea of empathy. That's a big one. The idea is also, how do we build our listening skills? How do we also build a pause? Because sometimes things can feel heated, especially in these times where people feel like they are quote unquote right.
Mm-hmm.
We allow for the space for conversation. I don't know that before November we're going to get there. I'm not convinced.
Yeah.
We have a lot of work to do. And I think what's interesting, Ekua, also when you said about homework. So I'm a type A personality, and I like every time. So for me, homework is one of those things. I'm like, oh, give me homework and I'll do it. Like I understand it. So yes, I don't know that it's the North Star of what we're trying to reach is how do we create spaces where different experiences and different perspectives are valued. That's the goal here. That's what unhiding allows for. It allows for connection.
Absolutely. And the Ekua, for sure. So you heard me saying that, knowing that, of course, one of the candidates apparently has just become Black. Who knew? So having said that, what do you believe is what we can do to show the empathy to actually have a closer connection to one another? What are some of the observations you've been able to make?
I mean, I think there's a few different things going on. One, I think our society is so based on making money off of people that the media really manipulates us for clicks, for money, for all that stuff. And I think that that's part of why we see ourselves so divided, because the news, which was when I was growing up, I mean, maybe, at least they were attempting to be unbiased. And it was not necessarily hewing to one avowed way of thinking and being. But now we like openly have like a network that is focused on this type of way of thinking, another network that's focused on this type of way of thinking. And so there's no meeting in the middle, right? We're not all watching the same things. So I think that that's a big problem. And I think if the media, different media houses really look at themselves and say, like, we can't be about just the money. But of course, that's another sort of fundamental thing that this nation is based on. So that's something we need to look at culturally. But I think in between, like humans that are like not part of any sort of establishment or just sort of walking this nation together, I think there just has to be a real humility. Yes, you might really feel really strong about your beliefs, but know that the other person also feels strongly about their beliefs. So how do we respect each other's beliefs if we really feel that what they're believing or doing is harmful to us or to the society? Having those conversations, because you're never going to get anywhere when you're shouting at someone, right? Like there's a reason why we say you catch more bees with honey, so I think humility.
Yes, got it. And Ruth, I saw you shaking your head, so do tell me, what were you feeling there?
Yep. No, I think we are on the same page. It's how do we allow for space, right? And some grace in terms of just being able to hear people. So the listening. And then I think that piece that we can also agree on is that idea of pause, like allowing for sometimes things do get heated and we feel like we are right and we are not listening in that moment to someone else. And so how do we allow for that pause to settle a little bit and then re-understand and have that's what empathy is about, right? Is imagining and thinking and believing that you can understand someone else's footsteps or thoughts. That's the goal here. And I love the words humanity. And I also love the word humility, like just allowing to be humble a little bit that you may not know. And so how do we create that space?
Absolutely. And certainly, Ruth, we know that, that this is a complicated experiment, I'll say. Talk about democracy in a pluralistic society. We have all these ethnicities, all these races, it's never been done before. And sometimes it can be challenging. I mean, but I remain hopeful that we will, as they say, as Martin Luther King, we shall overcome. I mean, what do you see happening with this quote unquote consequential election in November?
Oh, wow, Curtis, that's the question that you said the gotcha question you were going to ask me. Yeah, I think I'm worried about the day after the election, because
Okay,
I think
gotcha.
there's half the people that are going to be okay, and half the people that are going to be upset. And
Gotcha.
I think it's going to, and I don't know that we will know the results of the election
Wow, that's true.
immediately right after. And so that's concerning, because we are a nation that believes in the smooth transition of power, and that's an ideal that we hold. And so what we saw before, if that's any indication or any kind of pretest, I'm worried about the day after. And I don't mean it in a conspiracy way. I mean it in there's a candidate who really, it will, if that person doesn't win, if he doesn't win, will contest it. Has already talked about that. So that feels uncomfortable, right? Because that we all like certainty. And so waking up on November 6th and the idea of not having certainty is can feel really intense, and it will feel intense. And yeah, I'm concerned.
Gotcha. Now, Ekua, you're coming from a country that has a long, let's say, history of tradition, and also coming out of colonialism. So now you're here in the States, having witnessed what happened back in 2020. We're definitely in for, as I say, a ride. Your feelings as somebody trying to being here, but maybe taking a 30,000-foot view of what's happening.
I think in terms of Ghana, so Ghana went through 5 successive coups between 66 to 883 or something like that.
Ghana, I have to even jump in here. You're absolutely right. I remember when I was studying. Now it seemed like every time I would blink, there had been another coup and takeover in Nigeria. I mean,
yeah.
That I thought that with Flight Lieutenant Jerry Rawlins, there was a sense of stability. Is that no longer the case? Tell me.
Well, it's definitely so. Interesting about Flight Lieutenant Jerry Rawlings is that he, came in by coup, but he, because he was not really able to be overthrown, he did provide a sense of stability for the nation in that regard. And then he ultimately, in 1992, he ushered in a democratic election, and he was voted in, and stayed on for, I believe, another 2 terms. And then since then, we've had, peaceful transitions, which is, thank God for that. And we need that. And that's a great thing. But I think that it's America, we kind of take that for granted. And in the 2020, the whole, in the 2020 election, when that was sort of threatened or tested, that was really, really scary, especially to see the January 6th footage and to see that happening. And
Nana, I thought that the narrative was that it was a tourist visit. That's what they said, right?
My gosh. That was shocking to me, because I think that I know that, especially with the police and armed guards, for people who are saying that they really hold to people in uniform, for them to trounce over them and to trounce this building and go into people's offices and urinate and do all that. I was just it's shocking to me that happened. And in some ways, even though a lot of people, there's a court process that's taking place and playing out, I'm shocked that there wasn't more, consternation within the culture about that. So that is really wild to me.
Yes, indeed. Well, one of the things, like I said, we will let it unfold in November. Okay, so nothing that, as you say, Ruth, nothing that we can do, and it won't be solved there. So I am happy. And Ruth, I'm not asking for any fee or anything like that. But yes, this is another I see valuable connection that I've been able to make for you, huh?
Absolutely. No, I'm excited to connect offline, Ekua, and talk. And I think there is something we can do, Curtis.
Talk to me.
We can vote.
Yes.
We can vote.
That's right. Yes.
That's the piece that we, people who sit home and say, well, it doesn't really matter. My vote's not, it doesn't count. And I know we've heard that story. It actually does count. And in the system that we have right now, it does for a while. And so how do we just get out and vote? Get your friends to vote. And it's not just the big elections, it's the small ones too. Yeah. I vote every year, every time I can vote, because somebody fought for my right to vote. So,
yes, absolutely. And see, that's the thing, Ruth, that was so eloquently said, is that there's another party that actually plays the long game, and the long game involves the local elections. From school boards, community boards, all those particular things are.
I just listened this morning to an NPR story on that long game that was a brilliant mastermind move of thinking about the local elections that some people kind of thought nothing about, right? Oh, nobody cares about the
that's right.
Board or whatever. And yet that's how different people got representation.
Yes.
So vote. And vote. And even when it feels like, it's raining out, it's probably too late, go vote. Vote and read what you're voting on, which is also feels difficult. I don't know why, because it's not always those long things, but read about it.
Yes, indeed. And I guess, going back a little bit, Nana Ekua, I got to look at, the liberation movements in Africa. And certainly we do know when we were throwing off the yoke of colonialism and racism in what is now Zimbabwe, formerly Rhodesia, we had a serious guy, man, and then the folks loved him, Robert Mugabe. But then, Robert, you had the revolution, you changed the system and whatnot. When's it time to hang up your shingle and move on? I guess never on some level. Can people give up power?
Yeah, I mean, something that's the what, $50 zillion question. I think power, it must be so intoxicating, because I think about that a lot even with respect to, this 2020 election. I'm like, dude, few people get to that level of becoming president. If you were president and it didn't work out the next time, you're still part of a rarefied club. Why is it so important to you to come back? You know what I mean? So I don't know. I don't know what happens in that Oval Office. I don't know what happens in all of these corridors of power. I know that, it's money and it's all this kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, all of that comes with so much pressure. And I'm shocked that, somebody would want to stay for, 30 years, 40 years.
And think about what Joe Biden just did for us, right? He stayed, and I think that was the move that he made. It must have been so hard to make that choice, because to your points, the idea of power and the idea of getting things done, and it's got to be exhilarating. It's also got to be addictive. It comes with a lot. And yet he made a choice, right? To say, you know what's best for the country? Yeah, I want to stay, sure. Mm-hmm. But what's best for the country? And I know he wasn't alone in his decision-making around that, right. But that we just witnessed that somebody's saying, okay, this is the time to get out.
You know what, and Ruth, you're so right. Talk about a selfless move.
Yeah.
Real, truly extraordinary. And that's why he will go down as one of the most consequential presidents of any time, for sure. So you know what? Let's go on a better, a different note.
Something happened.
So give me some more thoughts in terms of your book, Ruth. Tell me about. I want to know what now, because we know that there are more that connects us than separates us. That we should every day approach each day to do our very best. When did you embrace that, Monica? And is that something that you also have tried to impart with your young charges?
I think I'm always trying to impart that with young charges, but I think there's some layers that we have to dig through first, right? And it comes in twofold. One is, how do we do the work on ourselves? And I call it that self-centered work, to understand where have we felt like we needed to hide part of ourselves? Where have we felt like we needed to fit in? Or how do we understand our own differences? And how do we understand others' differences? So that's a piece of this work that's so important, like acknowledging that piece, that self-awareness piece. And then the second part that I'm really trying to, and this is the long game, like we talked about, is how do we get leaders to buy into this? Because we know in workplaces and in organizations and in schools and universities that unless leaders embrace a mentality of valuing difference and valuing different experiences and perspectives, nothing changes. We can have all the people in the world saying this should be different, but if leaders don't embrace that and don't model that, then how do we can't change it. And so that's the long game for students and for upcoming leaders, is how do we break this model? Because I grew up in a model, Curtis, and I own it, of old school leadership where we kept people at arm's length. We were hidden. We didn't show our vulnerabilities. We felt like we had to have all the answers.
Yeah.
And yet, how do we break that to show things like empathy? We have a whole model of the idea of connection and understanding our differences and representation and empathy. And at the core of it is belonging. Yeah. And so how do we create those spaces so that people can bring their best selves to work, that they can be supported for their differences and ask for support when they need it? And my belief, absolutely, and I write it in my first book and I highlight it in my second and really dig in a little bit, is that leaders need to go first.
Yes. Love that. Love that. Nana Ekua, one of the things in terms of your book is, talk about the father being a philanderer. That's very different than being a polygamist. Okay.
Yeah.
So do you delve into the nuance there?
I do. And I think that something that I've been thinking about a lot is, I worked really hard to make this gentleman and all of the characters very complex, very three-dimensional, because I think that on some level, as a Black woman living in the United States, we talked a little bit about, how, we felt that we've needed to hide. There is this sort of instinct to protect and to hide the sort of more complicated or unflattering parts of a culture, because you want to just present only the best, because you don't want to feed any stereotypes. And I think that one could read this book and say like, oh, there go those hyper-sexed Africans, but it's not about that. I think that I really worked hard to paint a picture of a really nuanced cultural collision, a collision of cultures, a collision of times, tradition to modernity, and really present like it's not a simple, it's not simple. You can't, just kind of stroke, do that broad brushstroke on this. I think if you read it with that, you will see there's so many layers to this book. And to all of the characters. And I think it reveals that we all have a lot of work to do, because this is one society that I focus on. But we're talking about the United States. There are things that we haven't resolved yet that we still need to resolve.
Yes, and true. And as you say, Rome wasn't built in a day, Ruth.
No.
Oh my God. Well, you know what? This has been an incredible discussion, and based on how you guys have all responded, yes, Ruth, you will be invited back to the cookout. You too, Nana Ekua, back to the cookout, okay? I don't know what you'll bring in, but unlike the NightWatchman, I go beyond just salmon, okay?
Thank you. I'm in for that.
Excellent. So do tell me, in terms of Unhide and Seek, Ruth, where can I get it? Tell me the multiple platforms that it is featured on. Talk to me.
Sure. So it just was released this past week and it's on Amazon right now. And then it will be uploaded to barnesandnoble.com, walmart.com, anywhere you buy your book. It's available on Kindle and print, and then soon to be audio.
Ooh, very nice. Well, okay. So now you do, of course, know my background. I am married to what? A voiceover actress who does audiobooks. So just putting a shameless plug. That's what that is, not Echo. A shameless plug. And so then do tell me my parents' marriage.
Yes, my parents' marriage. You can get it on anywhere books are sold, also on audio and ebook. So wherever you prefer to buy your books, whether an indie bookstore or Amazon, Barnes and Noble, you can get it.
Okay, and I guess lastly, because as you said, Ruth, it was released last week. So you have any tours that I should know about?
Not yet, but if you have any you want me to do, let me know.
That was a good one. Ekua, what about you?
I'm going to be in San Francisco later today, doing an event, and I have an event in DC in September. You can go to my website, nanabrew-hammond.com, and check the upcoming events tab to keep up.
Beautiful, beautiful. Well, we have been left without a night watchman, but maybe he has some parting words for us. Let's see what he has to say.
All right. Once again, you've been watching and listening to Soul Lounge Prime Time on WHCR 90.3 FM, the voice of Harlem. Also live streaming on YouTube and Facebook. You can always find us on Monday evenings at 7 p.m. on the radio and 8 o'clock on your favorite channels. Thanks for joining us, and we will see you next week.
Who knew that the Night Watchman would do this?
He's all things. He is all things.
Exactly. Y'all, an incredible show. Thank you so much.
Thank you.